All right. Take two. Hello, friends. Good to see you all here in the room. Meetings, I have to confirm that we're being recorded here. There we go. Good to see you all here in the room and those of you in TV land across the internet. I appreciate you joining us. Looking forward to sharing with you all today. I'm Robin Irizarry. I'm with Audubon Mid-Atlantic. I've got to give a shout out to my colleague Keith Russell, who's there on Zoom as well. So you can always ask Keith to fact check things if you don't think anything I'm saying seems accurate. Keith will know. And then I got to do the pressing the button. Is it clicking or?
Maybe I'll
See that? That's the clicking. All right, here we go. So who's talking to you? Many of you I've probably met out in the field or at some other birding related function. But if you don't know who I am, Robin Irizarry. I'm our Delaware River Watershed Program Manager with Audubon Mid-Atlantic. My background is in ecological landscape design, so I have a landscape architecture degree from Temple. Worked for a few years after that doing ecological design and construction and maintenance, installing meadows like lawns to meadow conversions, putting in rain gardens, a lot of habitat garden work, really getting familiar with native plants, falling in love with native plants, and trying to share that passion with other folks. I've been working in environmental restoration, stewardship, and education since 2008. I've been with Audubon since 2019. I've served on our board of the Winco Audubon, our local chapter, which I'm sure you all know, since about 2015. And I currently live along the Tookenny Creek in Cheltenham Township. I'm literally on the border of Philly and Montgomery County. So if I see a really good bird in my backyard, I can run across the train tracks there and get a ticket for Philly as well. And I've only done that once with an evening grosbeak that landed in the backyard. So it's nice to be right on the edge there.
Western Tanager?
What's that?
Western Tanager?
I didn't get that one in Philly. I did have a Western Tanager came to the bird feeder, yeah, but I could go off on a tangent there. As you can tell, I'm an avid birder, and Naveen mentioned I also enjoy doing some woodworking, some carving, mostly of birds. So that's a bit about me, but one thing I wanted to add just special for tonight is I'm really excited to be speaking at the Academy of Natural Sciences, which I've never gotten to do before. This is young Robin Irizarry, the one to the left.
Which one?
Yeah. Circa 1990. This is my first visit to the Academy of Natural Sciences, to the dioramas, and I feel like this was like one of those core memories, like a pivotal moment of like, oh yeah, animals are really cool. So, I think the Academy of Natural Science has had a part in my trajectory and the career path that I've taken and my passion for birds. So thank you for the opportunity. So a bit about where I work. I work with the National Audubon Society in our regional office, the Mid-Atlantic office. I'm sure you all are pretty familiar with the National Audubon Society, but we're a large nonprofit organization that's working hemispherically in North and South America, Central America, the Caribbean. I've been to Canada and the Arctic, all up in this hemisphere here, to really help birds and bend this bird curve. I'm sure, again, most of you are familiar with the report that came out a few years back demonstrating that we've lost about 3 billion North American birds since 1970. There's a lot of factors that are, at play there, and Audubon is trying to work to address many of those factors on many different levels, working with all sorts of folks. Some of the ways that we are trying to do this work is outlined there with habitat conservation. So doing actual on the ground work, preserving habitat, restoring habitat, taking stances on climate and policy and trying to help guide some of those decision makers, to make decisions that are going to benefit birds and people. And really rallying with communities to get people excited about birds, to really make this habitat kind of work relevant in people's lives, which for us seems like a no-brainer, but for a lot of folks it might be, why should I care about the birds? What does that have to do with me? So it's the kind of work that, we're always doing at Audubon. And today I'm just going to share with you a bit more about, what I specifically get to do. So I mentioned I'm with Audubon Mid-Atlantic. That is our regional office. If you were not aware, we used to have an Audubon, Pennsylvania office, a Maryland office. Post-pandemic, they merged those offices. So now we are the Mid-Atlantic region. And it includes some work in Delaware that we're doing as well. But we have offices in Philadelphia at the Discovery Center and in Mill Grove in Audubon, Pennsylvania, John James Audubon Center, his historic house. And we have the Patterson Park Center in Baltimore as well, where we have some staff. We are situated along the Atlantic Flyway, so a lot of the work we're doing is really trying to bend that bird curve for a lot of these birds in specific. The birds that are traveling along this migratory path, as well as a lot of the resident birds who don't make that journey but are still, important to us. Within National Audubon Society, we have a number of different initiatives, and our water-centric initiative has been recently rebranded to Rivers, Lakes, and Wetlands. And there are several priority areas across the network where folks are really trying to make a difference in water habitat, water ecosystems. The Great Lakes, looking at Western water, working down in the Everglades, the Mississippi River, and our small but mighty Delaware River watershed. If you're not too familiar with some of the history or context of the Delaware River watershed, surprise, surprise, we're within it. But this is Lenapehoking. This is the ancestral land of the Lenni Lenape people. And I apologize, I'm missing an N in Lenni in the first part of that. We're looking at about 13,500 square miles that spans 4 states, PA, New York, New Jersey, and Delaware. There's a tiny little fraction that's like actually in Maryland, but we just don't even bother mentioning, This is the longest undammed river east of the Mississippi, which is pretty significant. Everything else has seen a lot of damming, and we know that that has implications on fish populations and how they're able to move, which also has effects again on the birds that rely on those fish. And we know that this is important year-round habitat and migratory stopover for at least 400 bird species that's been documented. No stellar sea eagle yet, though, right? So we'll get that. We'll get there. So our work within the Delaware River watershed, is specifically looking at ways that we can maintain and improve water quality that's going to support these birds that rely on this habitat, but also the 13 million people who are drinking water from this watershed. If you're not aware, New York City also gets most of its water from, all of its municipal water is coming from the Delaware River watershed, although they're along the Hudson, they're not even on the river. They've got long pipes that are drawing from the reservoirs up at the headwaters. So when we have, multi-state discussions on how the water is handled, New York gets a big say in that as well, because a lot of their population is drawing on that water. But also, there's implications on, okay, how much can New York take? If we're down here, we need that water too, and what's happening upstream affects our communities downstream. So there's a lot of communication that has to happen in that regard. The work that I particularly get to be involved in is less so that policy side that some of our other staff are doing, working with communities to engage people about specific issues, going to Capitol Hill to talk to legislators. My work is a lot more of that on the ground, hands-on work, planting trees, getting community members out to project sites, doing that fun conservation stuff that I really enjoy. And it aligns with the work that we are trying to do through our watershed program, which is protecting and improving, restoring habitat for key species, supporting policies that promote and restore clean water and healthy habitat, and working within our network and partners to amplify these messages. All right, nice cerulean warbler there. The work that's happening across the watershed, again, beyond the scope of what I do, there's staff who are working within the upper watershed of the Delaware It's not always specifically labeled as Delaware River Watershed Programming, but there is work happening that overlaps because our geography overlaps with a lot of other stuff that's happening. So we have forestry initiatives in other parts of the state, but that's also happening at the headwaters. A lot of those sustainable forestry initiatives are looking at, responsible logging practices that can manage those woodlands to create the proper habitat, for birds like the cerulean warbler, like golden wing warbler. And there's collaboration between our staff in PA and staff in our New York offices as well. Within the central watershed, closer to, more like where we are, there's a lot of urbanization, some suburbs. We have a lot of habitat fragmentation. There's a lot of water quality issues involved with urban habitats as well as rural habitats, agricultural runoff, things like that. And in the lower watershed, as we get more coastal, we have folks who are doing work, rallying folks around important issues like how many horseshoe crabs should be, able to be harvested. How can we maintain, sufficient quantities of eggs for things like the red knots that are relying on those every year when they make that long journey. But as I mentioned, my work primarily falls within the Schuylkill River watershed right now. As we expand our team, we look to be doing more across the watershed. I'll mention also our team currently is me. We are a team of 3 as we're structured, but we have had 2 folks move on to other positions elsewhere. So at the end, I'll make a plug to keep an eye out if any new positions come up and you want to work with me in this kind of fun work. Let's talk. So again, our approach for addressing water quality and habitat quality within the area of influence that we're in is looking specifically at riparian restoration, which we'll get into in a bit, and reducing habitat fragmentation, which we see throughout urban and suburban communities, as well as increasing public investment, securing public dollars for big projects to make sure that we can have the habitat and water quality that we need. So looking at riparian restoration, reducing fragmentation, just to help you visualize, we have a lot of waterways that flow through Philadelphia, many of which are now underground and invisible to us in our daily lives. And we have varying health and quality of these different watersheds. You take a walk in the Wissahickon, beautiful forested woods all throughout, robust forested landscape. It's really a gem. And then you take a similar walk through Tacony Creek, where I've worked for a long time. It's a community I grew up in. I grew up playing along Tacony Creek, and it's a very different story. There's still beautiful swatches of nature and habitat, but the quality of water there, the quality of habitat, is much different than what you'd see in the Wissahickon. We have issues like combined sewer overflows that are making the water unsafe to to really touch or be around. During certain times of year and when it's flooding and things like that. And, we have similar situations in places like Cobbs Creek in West Philly, which is where I do end up spending a lot of my time with the work that we do. But these corridors, these waterways are really important pathways when you think about migrating birds, especially things that aren't like straight shot flying right over us. A lot of the smaller passerine birds, a lot of these things are moving along these waterways. And we all know this as birders, because those are the places we like to go and find the birds. We know that there's going to be great birds hopping in the springtime along the Wissahickon. It's a great spot to look for warblers and things like that, to get down to Hines and see what's showing up. So waterways really are an important vector for migrating birds. They're traveling up and down these rivers and streams, all up and down the Atlantic Flyway. And a lot of these birds pass right through our communities in the Delaware River watershed. So let's get into some of the specific work that we're doing at Audubon, because what I'm hoping is at the end of this, you're going to be so inspired that you're going to want to come help me dig holes, because there's a lot of holes to be dug, a lot of plants to get in the ground. So if you're into that, let me know. We're gonna talk afterwards. Riparian restoration, just to make sure we cover our bases, and if folks are not familiar with the terminology, Riparian is just referring to habitat that is streamside along waterways, creeks, rivers, streams. We call that riparian habitat. So when we're doing riparian restoration, it means we're looking at, habitat right along the banks of those streams, or floodplain, or in wetlands. When we talk about riparian buffers, we're talking about building up this vegetated area that is running parallel to those streams. Those vegetated areas are, again, really important for birds that are migrating, traveling through those spaces. But they also have important benefits for the water quality. Those trees are shading the water, keeping that temperature cool. The roots are stabilizing banks and minimizing erosion. The leaves that are dropping in there become food for macroinvertebrates, which become food for birds. So these are really important spaces right along our waterways here. We want to protect them. And where we don't have sufficient trees, we want to make sure we're going in and planting trees and, trying to manage some of the invasive plants that are there and make sure there's positive, good growth of native plants that can serve as really good habitat. We're working within our program to look at restoring and conserving buffer habitat on both private and public land. We'll see a bit of that in some of the slides here. And we're in the process of also creating different demonstration projects at the sites that we own at our two Pennsylvania environmental centers, which you'll see as well. So we're going to start up in the headwaters, at least as far up in the headwaters as I tend to get with this work. And that's our work in the Schuylkill Highlands. This work is part of the Delaware River Watershed Initiative, which is funded through the William Penn Foundation. So we have been working for a few years now in Chester and Berks counties with a lot of the partners that you see listed down there below, Berks Nature, a bunch of these great folks. Our role in the work, there's a lot of science organizations, a lot of land stewardship organizations there. Our particular work in this shared work that we take on in this footprint has been to engage with local property owners who live at streamside properties within priority headwater subwatersheds. So the DRWI had really been structured around looking at headwaters and preserving headwaters and maintaining the water quality upstream, because that's all flowing downstream. If we can keep it clean upstream, it makes it a less heavy lift as we try and clean up the water further downstream. So the work that we were doing was primarily an engagement program connecting with streamside property owners that have a creek running right through their house, live right along the creek, not their house, live right along the creek. We wanted to get them set up with their first riparian buffers at their own properties. And, this was a pretty simple program, native plant giveaway. We gave them the plants that they needed, set them up with resources to take care of them, gave advice about how to maintain these things, and really encourage them to have this just be the first step of what will be long-term stewardship of their stretch of the bank along their property. So far, we've worked with about 70 streamside properties there. Moving downstream, we have the Perkiomen Creek riparian buffer that we're working on. This is a view from Egypt Road, where it goes over the Perkiomen. And what you see to the left there is the upper edge of the John James Audubon Center property at Mill Grove. So John James Audubon's house. You're looking downstream, and to the left there, which is the east, is an area of bank that was really heavily damaged by Hurricane Ida back in 2021 fall. A lot of trees came down, things were all tangled. Contractors were brought in to kind of clear what they could. In the end, it left us with, a lot of open gaps in our riparian buffer. If you look across the creek, you can see a better idea of what we want that buffer to look like. Nice and full. Those trees are stabilizing that bank. With all the vegetation going on the other side, you can see that starts to pose threats of, that bank washing away. There's an aerial to show you where we are. So just off screen to the south, would be trails that run up to the John James Audubon Center, the visitor center there, the museum. And across the way there is the Perkiomen Creek Trail, which connects to Schuylkill River Trail. If you ever want to go take a bike up there and bike through Valley Forge and work your way all the way down to Center City, Philadelphia, you can make it happen. So we had this damage done by Ida, and I think I pressed it instead of clicking it. So let's see what the swirling vortex of loading wants to do. Damage was done by Hurricane Ida. It did a lot of damage right along the bank. You can see how minimal that buffer is now. So we've been in the process of restoring this buffer edge. Clicking.
Maybe the arrow key.
There it goes. We'll see how many of those clicks I banked, and we'll see if it just starts running through for me. Down below there, you see a shot from that day, at least it's September 2021, when Hurricane Ida flowed, rose the banks of the water of the creek, and the Perkiomen Creek rose over 25 feet. At least that we know it topped out the gauge at Graterford. This picture is from the confluence of the Perkiomen and the Schuylkill. But imagine the rise of water here. The water crested those banks well within that floodplain that was shown. It was completely flooded. 70,000 cubic feet per second. It's like a freight train going by that gauge every second. Lots of water going through there. So we're trying to restore that habitat. We're trying to rebuild that buffer. We have so far installed over 300 trees and over 200 saplings, which are just baby trees. And the area has been protected with deer fencing. We had a really great planting day through, connecting with Villanova and their St. Thomas Day of Service. We had funding through the American Water Charitable Foundation, Schuylkill River Action Fund. We had a lot of support to make this happen. Here's some great shots of some of the prep work that went into that before all of our volunteers came out. So, we had to do a lot of prep to make sure everything's ready to go for the volunteers to show up, getting the fencing ready. We did have some contractor help on this as well. Lots of trees to stage so that they're somewhat in place when the volunteers arrive. And then the day of, just waiting on the click here. The day of, we had lots of, about 60 folks from Villanova come out to help us out. Since the screen is not advancing yet, we'll talk trees. We've got some oaks there. We used a lot of swamp white oak. There's some sweet gum put in there, some birch, a couple magnolias in there, some hackberry, lots of fun stuff. All native stuff that will do well in these conditions. Maybe I'm not really sure why it's not getting to advance here. Oh, there it goes. All right, so here we go. A lot of students from Villanova University helping us out, getting that area planted up, helping to finalize the deer fencing. This is what it looked like at the end of the day. We went back and did some touching up because volunteers are great, but not everybody has the same experience in getting stuff planted. So there's always a little quality control at the end of the day. And then stuff happens like this. So like the next week, one of those hackberries that was standing and remaining decided to fall on the deer fence. And we did have some deer waste no time to get in there and do some damage. So we had to go in and do some repairs. This is part of maintaining riparian buffers. You can plant these things, but there's a lot of work in keeping them going. So in addition to needing your help in planting all those trees, I also need your help scaring deer away if you want to do that. Not really, but that'd be fun. But also just keeping up with this stuff. There's a lot of maintenance that has to happen throughout the time. So what do you do when a giant tree falls on your riparian buffer project? You come out and you take the tree apart. But sometimes this is just to show you kind of what our work in the DRW looks like I like to say no 2 days are the same. You're running a chainsaw and then you have to hop on a Zoom meeting with, you know, some grant work in Philadelphia. So it's fun. You wanna get involved with this kind of stuff. Let's go from the Perkiomen, we'll travel down to Whippy Meadow, getting closer to home here for folks. And I'm sure at least some of you have made it out to Whippy Meadow. So this would be nice to talk about here. So Whippy Meadow is along Cobbs Creek. This is a stretch of 2 5-acre meadows. So the area we're managing is about 10 acres along Cobbs Creek, just north of Mount Moriah Cemetery, just upstream. There's some more photos here to give you some context. Right on the edge of the neighborhood, it's about a mile south of the environmental center, if that helps you to place this. That's Cobbs Creek Parkway, and then Whitby Avenue running, you know, across that intersection there. The meadows here were established by Parks and Rec. They were first seeded in 2010, and over the past several years, since about 2020, we've been working with them through funding from the national, that should be NIFWF, not NWFWF, National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, and through their Delaware Watershed Conservation Fund, which has supported us in being able to plant a bunch of trees and do some stewardship work on site there. If you have not been out to the site, I really encourage you to get out there. It's a beautiful space. I will preface this with that paths are not really mown right now. I'm trying to get our mower service so that we'll have it ready for the season, so we can get y'all a fresh path for birding down there. But this work has been a huge collaboration with Parks and Rec, Fairmount Park, the Cobbs Creek Trail Ambassadors, Darby Creek Valley Association, Land Health Institute, who helped to develop the natural resources inventory for the site before any of the work began, the Philly Mycology Club, Master Watershed Stewards, and Clean Air Council. All these folks have really helped to get folks out to help with the planting, to help activate the space, help people realize, you know, what a gem this is down there. We had a really fun mycology and birding walk in the summer, which, if you know, like summer bird walks are typically pretty slow, but it's a good time to also be able to look down at mushrooms and, you know, distract people with mushrooms when there's no birds. So here's what the Philly side meadow looks like in the summertime. And that's the, you know, fall, winter. It's a beautiful space. Lots of great birds down there. We've done a lot of planting with our partners. We've done litter and debris removal, removing some invasive vines and things growing up on the plants that we've planted. We've done some seeding to help diversify, you know, what's predominantly warm season grasses. So a lot of switchgrass, a lot of big blue stem, trying to get some species diversity along the edges for, you know, seeds and pollination, all sorts of great stuff down there. We've also been increasing site accessibility so folks can get down there to bird. Over 300 native trees planted. I think this actually could get updated. That should be probably closer to 500. Well, yeah. And about 180 yet to come this year. And we planted over 400 live stakes of native dogwood and willow with volunteers. And there's been some targeted seeding after the initial mowing that Fairmount Park did, and then some spot seeding here and there as needed. Here's the crew from Mobilize Green, who's been really instrumental in doing a lot of the work there, and with our pollinator network work as well. So they're planting some red chokeberry in that enclosure there. They're getting some Japanese hops off of one of the trees that was planted there, and probably fixing the cage that would have been around that, but probably got knocked over by a deer. This is what, you know, a planting typically looks like afterwards. We've individually protected these trees. It's not a big deer fencing swath, but individual cages for a lot of these trees. The deer have really tested these out, and some of these didn't make it. We've also had some issues this season with a lot of rodents going after the, right at the root flare. Where there were trees that I went to check on and they had full green leaves on them still, and I just like went to adjust it, and I realized that every root around the circumference at the base had been snipped. So that whole tree just came up, and it must have just happened because the leaves were still green. I kind of wonder if it's something to do with the warmer winter and things are more active and scurrying around and looking for stuff to forage on. I don't know if folks have had experience with that. I'd love to chat about it. And there's Sky doing some spot seeding by hand there. It's live staking. If you're not familiar, live staking is a really great way to add some native species to the banks to really help stabilize banks with these fast growing species, silky dogwood, some black willow. So when these plants are dormant, typically around March is when we do this, the end of the winter, just before spring, when things would start pushing leaves. You can take cuttings of these shrubs and you can actually drive them right into the ground. And these plants are so vigorous that they will root and they'll start another clone of that plant right there. So it's a really effective way to get a lot of plants in. So here's an area where volunteers and some folks from Power Corps were helping us out. You can see this guy here is driving in a stake of rebar, and then you pull the rebar out and you tap the live stake back in its place. You can keep working along the bank like that. There's also been a lot of trash cleanup. You can see folks getting into the creek.
Who's that guy in the waivers? Is that
Do you
Jason?
know who's that?
It's Jason, isn't that Jason Waxy? Looks like
I don't think so. No, I don't think so.
no, it's like Jason Waxy.
That's Sam from the Mycology Club. I think this might be a Mycology Club guy too, but we'll track him down. We had a really nice cleanup event, a nice activity with folks from the Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority. And then we've done some access improvements as well. So there's Luke Rhodes from Fairmount Park, who's now at Pennypack Trust. But there were some big trees, some cherries that had come down in this area that was really just a swale where water was running off, and just a potential spot for additional erosion, just the steepness of this bank. So we were able to take apart the trees that had fallen, and with help from Mobilized Green, we came in and we used those logs in place. We half buried those in series so that we could create a series of log sills, we call those, to slow the water erosion so it doesn't pick up as much velocity. And then also it increased access so that we can actually get down there for bird walks, because that was just a log jam there in the past. We have this handy brush mower for maintaining the path. It's not working right now, but figuring that out. And then we worked with folks to install a sign here. This was a grant through the Clean Air Council and partners at the Tiny WPA built the kiosk, and this is part of a series of signs that are happening all up and down Cobbs Creek and through the community. So we were able to get one here at this gateway, and on the back it actually talks about the meadow restoration. A really fun story too, through our pollinator network work that we're doing, which we'll talk about a bit later. We've been working with a group at one of our community gardens around the corner that we've been connected with. And there's a group called Brothers to Brother, and they did an urban adventure camping night. And they were camping in the neighborhood in Cobbs Creek on one of these, community gardens that was at one point a vacant lot. They wanted to go on a nature hike. And since we were talking with them about the garden, we offered leading that hike with them at Whippy Meadow. So we decided that we would do a night hike, and we were able to get everybody set up with headlamps. And the kids had set up their tents over in the neighborhood a few blocks away. They hiked out to Whippy Meadow with us. We had everybody going through in the dark with the headlamps. We had the owl wings out there to talk about nighttime, nocturnal adaptations. It was really fun. If you had talked to these guys, a lot of them had never been in a wood setting like this, even though this is their park that's, you know, not far from here. And, you know, we hiked just in the loop around the meadow, but it was funny because the kids, you know, from their perspective, we had gone miles and miles away from home, but we had just done a little circle there. The next morning, we came back and we did that walk in the daylight with them on a bird walk with binoculars. We had a really, really fun time. So beyond those riparian buffer sites that we're working on, we're also doing some demonstration work at some of our environmental centers, at the John James Audubon Center. You know, we have the riparian buffer project that we talked about. We're also looking at developing some rain gardens to manage some additional stormwater from the building, and to be an educational opportunity to talk with folks about why those are important for, you know, receiving the water off the roof, slowing it down so that we are minimizing negative impacts on the stream. There's some lawn reduction, conversion to meadow that may be happening, and already existing is the permeable paving parking lot, which is another stormwater measure that we can take to slow down the runoff coming from the site. Here in Philly at the Discovery Center, which I hope many of you have had the chance to visit. You know, we have a really great opportunity stewarding this space as a really important and unique habitat space in Philadelphia. You know, if you're not familiar with the site, the Discovery Center is situated on the East Park Reservoir, which we've now been calling the Strawberry Mansion Lake. This is a 37-acre open water reservoir. It was decommissioned in the 70s, but this was at one point a functioning reservoir for Philadelphians for drinking water. Keith, who is on our call, has been really instrumental, and a lot of folks in the club and, you know, folks in years past have been involved in getting this space recognized as the important space it is for birds, and, you know, working with the city, convincing the city and funders to support, you know, preserving the space as an educational space, as a habitat space. We recognize this is a really beautiful and important space, and we want to make sure that we're stewarding it well. We want to, you know, figure out how we can maybe turn up the dial a little bit on enhancing that habitat, but without being too hasty and making any changes. It's a novel ecosystem. There's no water coming into it other than rainfall. It's not like a lot of reservoirs elsewhere in the state where they're fed by a creek and then there's a dam. This is just basically a bathtub. If you've been out there in the winter, in the fall, you know that the waterfowl love this space. We have, you know, a couple dozen hooded mergansers patrolling around, hundreds and hundreds of geese. I had an opportunity to just be working at my desk a few winters ago, and I got to see the tundra bean goose land on the ice from my desk. That was pretty cool. If you don't know about the tundra bean goose, look it up, because it's amazing. We won't go into that now, but it's a beautiful space and there's a lot of potential there. We want to be managing the woodlands, you know, starting to transition from the native species, from the invasive species that have sprung up, and really help to steer that a lot more towards native species. We are also, you know, being mindful that we want to increase equitable public access for the community around the space. This is a space that had been gated and fenced off from the community for a long time. So this has been a process in inviting people back in to experience the space. About 10 more minutes. All right. Thanks, Naveen. Keep me on track. This is also a space that we share with the Philadelphia Outward Bound School. So there's a lot of cool programming that happens there. There's a zip line, there's rock climbing. They, you know, train kids there and then take them out on excursions up in the mountains and stuff like that. So there's a lot of potential that's being considered. We did go through a master site development plan to look at options of what could be possible. None of this is set in stone yet. This is just, you know, considering what are our options, how ought we be stewarding this space, enhancing this space. Again, like I said, we don't want to do anything too hasty, like introduce some kind of fish that's gonna, you know, change up everything. Keith has been Really good in reminding people about the importance of this space for diving ducks, canvasbacks, and things like that. And this space used to be a lot deeper, and it was frequented by loons and a lot more canvasbacks. We still have them now, but not in the same numbers since the water levels had been dropped as the space was being drained prior to it being preserved. All right.
Robin, I'm sure you know this, but maybe it's not that widely known. More than 20 years ago, DVOC gave a conservation grant to help conserve the East Park Reservoir.
Yeah.
I like to think that that's what got it all started. That's probably an overstatement, but it's nice to know that we were in there at the very beginning.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's great foresight on the part of the club. The space really does present some great opportunities, to do some trialing and figuring out what could some enhancement look like. This was a floating island that we tested out with native plants on a raft, made by our fellowship student from the Alliance for Watershed Education and some students that came out to work on this. All right, I have one last subject here that we'll talk about, and that is our work in reducing habitat fragmentation in our urban and suburban communities. So you look at West Philadelphia here, you can see some of the landmarks we've talked about, and you can see a lot of gray as you see across a lot of Philadelphia. You can see that green swath being Fairmount Park there. One thing that we're trying to do, working with partners like the John Hines Wildlife Refuge, Bartram's Garden, a lot of the partners that we'll name here in a bit, is figure out how we can increase some of this native plant resources, some of these swatches of habitat in between some of these bigger swaths of green space. So right now, a big project that we've been involved with is what we call the Philadelphia Pollinator Network. And it's basically looking at, can we create hubs of gardens and within communities that can help to kind of bridge those gaps. It's not going to, be a solid line of green through those spaces, but it'll at least provide some more resources for things looking for them as they move through the community. We've been working with Thomas Jefferson University. Their Park in a Truck program is basically a DIY guide for communities who are trying to build their own gardens. And we've been able to put some of that into practice with some of these gardens, like the Cecil Street Garden you see there. The Hines Wildlife Refuge folks, National Wildlife Federation, Howard CDC, who's our local community group, who has been stewarding the site long before us. Folks like Clean Water Action, Bartram's Garden, Parks and Rec, Treat Philly, many more. This is what some of those smaller gardens have looked like within existing community gardens on vacant lots, planting a lot of native plants. These gardens vary in scale. Some of them are very small. Some of them are, full vacant lot sized gardens. But we're seeing, pollinators move in. We're seeing birds start to use the space. Native plant gardens for birds and pollinators. I like to tell people, we're inviting the pollinators in because they're pretty and all, but I like it because they're bird food. We need them for birds. But we realize that as we have opportunity to enhance habitat, we also have opportunity to create more equitable green space across the city, and specifically focusing on communities where there's not a lot of green space accessible, right around. So just some photos. So this is the Cecil Street Garden. This is our kind of flagship garden for the Pollinator Network. Work started years ago. The photo on the left is a model that was developed with the students from Thomas Jefferson University and with Empowered CDC, our community group there, to really start to figure out what the garden space could look like, what could happen. Flash forward a few years, we have Mobilized Green helping us to assemble some of the gabion walls. We have the Carpenters Union coming out and helping us build benches and the arbor there. And we've got lots of beautiful plants growing in after just one full season growing. We've got lots of beautiful stuff coming in. This is what it looked like summer 2022. Summer 2023, it was looking nice and full, and it's even fuller than this now. And I encourage you all to swing by. This is Cecil Street and King Sessing Avenue. it's become a really key demonstration space for the community, as there's been a lot of additional conversations about urban greening, specifically in the Kingsesson community. So there've been a lot of tours that have come through this space to really look at what's possible elsewhere in the neighborhood. We've been part of an initiative that is William Penn funded. This is the Resilient Community Stormwater Initiative. And this has, we've been able to be a part of bringing folks together to discuss what the needs are in the community, where priority areas are. And this has helped really identify where some of these gardens ought to be and what people want to see there. We've done a lot of community engagement and tabling, talking about pollinators, why they're important, talking about native plants and birds. We have a park ambassador program that we've been piloting with Thomas Jefferson University. And this is a youth program where we're able to have actual paid youth working on a lot of the maintenance of these sites, a lot of assembly of some of the planter boxes and things that have been built. We have been seeing pollinators move in and start using these plants. We have had some challenges along the way where some of the gardens, it was more difficult to, maintain things, keep watering up, but we're troubleshooting these things as we go. And we've got lots more gardens yet to come. So this is one that we're working on a design now for the Agricultural Resources Center at Parkside, right on the edge of Fairmount Park there. Excuse me. We have installed over 25 in-ground gardens and over 35 freestanding planter box gardens of varying sizes. And we have a few more to come this year. So there'll be opportunities to get out there and work with us on those. And with that, I just want to plug one more time. If anything you saw looked interesting and you want to get out and do some of this stuff with us, there's my contact information. We can get you on our list so we know, so that you will know about upcoming opportunities to help out and get involved in that work. Also, as I mentioned, we did, we had some staff turnover, so we will have some job postings out sometime soon. So be on the lookout for that. That's of interest.
Thank you, Robin.
Woo, it's dark. I'll put the box settle back. The box turtle was a Whitby Meadow special. Beautiful.
Well, thank you, Robin. That was a very interesting talk. Do we have any questions? If there are any questions in the room, I'll take them first. If you are remote, you can put them in the chat and I'll read them out, or you can raise your hands in Zoom and I will call on you.
Real quickly, Rob, when you talk about these gardens, these are not really vegetable gardens, they're more habitat gardens.
Right. These are, we're putting in native, well, what are being called native pollinator plants, native plants, not really geared towards edible gardens. Some folks are doing edible gardening, but that's all raised bed because, in the city, there's light concerns. So it's not stuff that we're, expecting people to go pulling stuff out and start eating out of the ground. But yeah.
Any other questions in the room? Well, that's a question on Zoom from Keith. When do you have
Keith, like, what are you talking about?
When do you have time to sleep?
When do I have time to sleep?
It's fact check.
Yeah. I just don't.
Keith doesn't have questions, he has answers.
Yeah, Keith knows. That's if you haven't seen me out birding in a while, especially in spring and fall when all the good birds are around. It's because I'm probably out doing this stuff. But so join me out on one of these projects so we can go birding together. But you'll have a shovel in there.
All right, looks like Nilesh has a question on Zoom. Nilesh, do you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, I'm off mute. Robin, actually related to that question or comment from Keith, one of the things I always wonder about is leverage of effort, right? So, there's one of you, and, you showed a lot of pictures of people volunteering and so on and so forth, but how do you keep from feeling small in the presence of such large issues to address? You know what I mean? So even if you take just your John James Audubon Creekside restoration. I mean, that is a massive project, and there's a lot to be done there. How do you keep going?
But this is like the reflections, the really personal stuff, but this is great. Thank you, Nilesh. You know, I think it's important work, and it is big work, and there's always more that can be done, especially you look at, you know, along our waterways, there's, you know, beat up spaces everywhere that could use some attention. I think what we're trying to do is really focus our efforts around the riparian work. You know, the community greening, the pollinator work is something that, you know, had been started a few years back. We're kind of taking time now, we've been taking time to do some strategic planning and vision, like where can we as Audubon have the most impact with our work? And, you know, where can we align that? And we think for the watershed team, it really is along riparian corridor, you know, restoration work. But how can we support program partners in doing some of the more urban greening stuff and tie that back to water quality, bird habitat, make it relevant. As far as, you know, capacity, we always need more folks to help get this stuff done. You know, we try and build community relationships wherever we go. In West Philly, that has been a really important part of this work. Like, we couldn't do this if we didn't take the time first to build the community relationships that we have. The watershed is a huge footprint. You know, I'm not everywhere in it all at once. So prioritizing where we can get work done is really important. Yeah, I don't know if that answered your question, Lesh.
Well, it's part way there. I have a couple of follow-ups. Well, I'll wait until others have talked.
I have a question. So I think I saw that Parks and Recreation, Philadelphia City Parks and Recreation, partners, you know, on, you know, several of these projects. And I think our newborn conservation office or department or whatever we call that here, sent a link to us to a group called Save the Meadows, which is a piece of FDR Park where Parks and Recreation wants to put this sprawling you know, sports complex. And by sports complex, of course, we're not talking arenas, we're talking something for you know, people in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering, why do you know why they're doing that? I mean, they work with you to do one thing, and then they want to take down heritage trees in the meadows. It just seems like they're working at cross purposes.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't speak to the priorities of Parks and Rec, you know, and those decisions there.
Does Audubon have any influence regards, you know, what they're doing in other parts of the city, you know, in relationship to what they're doing with you? I mean,
Yeah, I think, you know, they've got to look at competing interests of all sorts of folks that they're considering.
politics.
I mean, that's always something, you know, that's always something. I think you as a birder, as someone who appreciates, you know, what these things are, the trees, the water, and that recognize the importance, you know, I think you've got to, you know, speak up about what you think is important. Because there's folks speaking up about, you know, on the other side as well. So, you know, I think in an area like Whitby Meadow, it's a lot clearer that it's like, okay, this is a habitat restoration space, it's a floodplain, it's, you know, maybe not the best for that. But there's a lot of, you know, other voices eyeing up those particular spots like FDR. So bigger conversations. I think Audubon's space has been trying to offer what insight we have about bird habitat, why those trees are important, why you know, spaces like the meadows are important for birds. And, you know, we hope that that's something that's being considered in the decision making.
Thanks. Any other questions in the room?
It's trying
Yeah.
to change people's definition of what a park is. Most people in the United States, this has happened around the country where Sandy Hook, you know, just different places where people say, oh, let's put a park, and they think of bathrooms, ball fields.
Mhm.
They don't think of a park, you know, trees. So it's Audubon's definitely changing that, you know, why you need this, why you need birds, you know, that I think it's.
Yeah, I think what's, like you're saying, our role is really making this relevant in people's lives, you know, like
Why it
why birds
matters.
are special, but also water quality, you know, all that stuff is something that, you know, needs to be considered in any of these decisions.
The Philadelphia Parks and Recreation Department, until a few years ago, was two departments, the Parks Department and the Department of Recreation, and they were combined, and there were reasons for that, you know, there was a lot of overlap with administration and doubling the costs and so forth. But I'm just wondering, what the plan would be today if FDR Park were still just the Parks Department, not Parks in the back. I don't know.
That's a good point.
Any other questions in the room? Any on Zoom?
Naveen, if I may, I'd like to ask a follow-up.
Good.
For a while, Robin, I, along with a couple of other people, measured water quality of the Perkiomen Creek, right at John James, right? We thought we were going to build a program that is part of the NASA GLOBE program, you know, to help teachers, et cetera, bring kids forward to understand water quality and do some of these measurements and so on. You know, the project didn't work in the sense that we couldn't actually go the step that we wanted to go to. But in the process, we collected data on the Perkiomen Creek. And to my, I guess, to my surprise and pleasure, the quality was quite good. And we were surprised at how well that water was being managed somehow. What's your view? Like, if you gave a rating to the watershed today in terms of water quality, where do you think we are?
As far as a rating, my understanding is that the watershed is cleaner than it has been in 100 years. You know, Philadelphia used to have dead zones where fish couldn't swim past Philadelphia. You know, there's been a lot of improvement with things like the Clean Water Act, legislation that's been passed to minimize, you know, or make it illegal for places to just dump, you know, waste from factories and things right into the waterways. I think there's always more improvement that can be done. And I think a really important step that folks can take in their own communities is to figure out, you know, where their local watershed, you know, what their local creek is, and get involved on that watershed level. That's always been my advice for folks, is if you want to get involved in the environmental work around you, figure out what your local creek is and start there. If there's a watershed, you know, organization that's already active, you know, get involved with them, just like you're doing with the water quality monitoring at JJC. You know, we're going to be installing some things like a rain gauge at the John James Audubon Center to help supplement kind of the dialogue that's happening there. You know, tying it into water, you know, when people visit the center, because primarily it's about birds, but you know, be good to get folks considering the water as well. Thank you, Nilesh. And I'm just like addressing the speaker here in the room. It's like there's like the speaker sitting there. I guess you're on the screen sitting there.
I can see you.
All right.
You mentioned that the Delaware doesn't have any dams in it, but there are a lot of other tributaries that do. Is Audubon working on dam removal? Is that part of their mission?
So at least in the Delaware watershed, to my knowledge, I don't think there's any active dam removal projects that we're really involved in, but there are organizations, American Rivers and stuff where, you know, their thing is like dam removal. But yeah, I mean, we're blessed in that the main stem Delaware has not been dammed, but right, there are dams along some of those tributary rivers and things like that. But not to my knowledge, I know I'm not involved in any dam removal.
Just I have a question. On these restoration sites, do you do any bird walks or bio blitzes to, you know, keep track of how things have changed
Yeah,
and to restore the area?
that's good. He's just working towards an angle towards the city nature challenge. That's sort of the trajectory of these questions, like. Yes, we aspire to, we aspire to have a bio blitz.
But
at
it could be
Wicked
field
Meadow.
trips for DVOC.
We've done some field trips, we've done some bird walks down at the site. We'd love to get you all down there to check it out. If you're not familiar with the site, we can show you around. Again, once I get that mower going, we'll get you a nice path that we can make it around the circuit again.
Want to get a field trip out to the meadows on the DVOC side?
Let's do it. I think Edge mentioned on the chat, like, if like anybody checked down there for woodcocks, and I haven't yet, but I've always thought that there's probably something down there.
Thank you. I will.
Get
Are
your
there
head
any-
on it.
Any other questions? I'll read a comment by Debbie. She says, fabulous community engagement, Robin. Everyone loves planting trees, shrubs, perennials. Important work, big work, and there's always more to be done. Habitat management and restoration is forever. Even in such a long game, every action makes a difference. And then she also added, the Schuylkill River used to be burning, literally, documented by the Delaware River Keepers Organization. Parts of Hines were on fire too. Philly is definitely far cleaner now, but still room for improvement. And then lots of comments saying great presentation, informative talk.
That's great. You'll get your $20 bill in the mail. My plants in the audience.
Greg says, thanks, very importantly focused on the one hand with the fields of habitat restoration and conservation, on the other hand, on the other with the birds and other life forms. As birders, we absolutely must be concerned with environmental work at this time in history, IMO. So talks like this help us think about that conjunction. Debbie adds, the birds reflect increased environmental health. Bald eagles now nesting, least bittern and American coot have returned too, both susceptible to toxins. There are no more questions. I am going to end the talk. Last call for questions. All right. Thank you, Robin. Thanks everyone for coming.
I have a, I think I have it.
All right, thanks to everyone on
I think
Zoom. I'm going to end the meeting now, unless you.
No, no.
Okay,
it's just-
all right.
yes,